You know, now that we have a Miles Morales Spider-Man game, does anyone think that Insomniac might do something with other Spider-Man characters? Like maybe a super beefed up Spider-Man Noir game, or maybe even a full-blown Avengers game, because let's be honest here, the one we got was, not the best. Hey guys, it's Rob here and welcome to my Spider-Man Miles Morales PS5 review, my very first PS5 review in fact. The next generation of gaming is finally here, and as with every generation, these cross-gen games are the first to come. But I think Miles Morales is a bit of a special case. Coming off of the amazing PS4 game Spider-Man PS4, which had fantastic combat, crazy gadgets, and one of the best Peter Parker Spider-Man stories that I've ever come across. It was a huge success and a fantastic game experience, so naturally I was very excited for Miles Morales when that was announced. I actually owned some Miles Morales comics back when I used to collect comics, which I actually gotta get back into that. Now in this new Spider-Man game, the main protagonist is not Peter Parker but Miles Morales, which was introduced in 2018 Spider-Man PS4. But is Spider-Man Miles Morales a good game? Does it live up to Spider-Man PS4, and is this game just DLC like some people have said, or is there something more to Miles Morales? We are gonna talk about all that and more in this PS5 review, so without further delay, let's get to the Spider-Man Miles Morales review. In 2018, Insomniac gave us what I think is the best Spider-Man combat out of any Spider-Man game in existence. And in Spider-Man Miles Morales, they have only built upon the fantastic foundation that they already laid out, with unfortunately some of the gadgets missing, but what it lacks in gadgets makes up for new powers and abilities. The very first thing I noticed about the gameplay was how different Miles plays than Peter. It's in just about every aspect of the gameplay to character to just everything about this new Spider-Man. This new Spider-Man is a less experienced Spider-Man, and Insomniac displays that not only through story but gameplay as well. When you leap off buildings or swing your way through the city, Miles will flail through the air, or at times he'll look back at the camera. It's even down to how he lands on surfaces, with it being more clumsy and often nearly falling off. Miles' swinging is also more stylistic than the more refined, almost old school Spider-Man Peter Parker swinging. And honestly, I'm having a hard time telling which one I like more because I like them both so much. And also, side note, the web swinging can be upgraded a couple times too, which you'll have to complete activities to unlock these abilities. But I think the biggest changes in this Spider-Man game and what makes Miles Spider-Man so fun to play with is the new powers. On top of the already fantastic combo combat that you get from games like Arkham Asylum and of course Spider-Man PS4 and all those fantastic games, you also have Miles' Venom powers. There were many times where I would use a gadget that pulls enemies in, and then I would use the Venom powers to jump them in the air, and then I would use another Venom power to smash them down to the ground. Different combos like this feel effortlessly and smooth, and it's quite a sight to behold, especially on the PS5. Now, with Miles Morales also comes his invisibility power, and Insomniac has adapted that into the gameplay as well, which can come in handy in a variety of ways. In fact, I'd say I enjoyed stealth more than the actual combat. There's just something so satisfying about cleaning out a room without getting caught. And with Miles Morales invisibility, it makes it extremely easy, sometimes a little bit too easy. The game gives you a lot of leeway with stealth. Even if you're seen, simply use the stealth to hide away. Add in a system that tells you if it's okay to take down a guard without another guard seeing, and other things like stealth upgrades, and it sometimes can be too easy. And keep in mind that I played through the whole story on the hardest difficulty as well. There were times where I would have liked some kind of challenge, and not just the stealth but the combat as well. And don't get me wrong, there were times where I had to fight a ton of enemies that were being thrown at me, and things did get a little chaotic and I died, but for the most part it wasn't even that difficult throughout the whole game, even on the hardest difficulty. The game is a fairly easy experience from my experience anyways, but still insanely fun to play, especially when there are a ton of enemies and you can get into almost trance-like state where you're bobbing, weaving through enemies and taking them down. It's all brought together in a nice neat bow that makes for one hell of an experience, especially with the different suits, skill trees, and other upgrades that vastly change the abilities and how you use them. Now, seeing as this is an open world game, it still has those open world game mechanics, so side activities are plentiful here, but I'll be honest here, it's not overbearing to the point where it feels like a chore. This being a smaller game, they could have easily stuffed this with a ton of side activities to keep you busy. I'd say there's just the right amount of side activities in this game to not become tedious and boring. Add in the fantastic movement system and swinging and traversal mechanics, and it's pretty relaxing trying to clear out the map. Now, aside from the side activities, there are some other side missions. The side missions were pretty decent. Some of them actually pointed towards some stuff that you did in Spider-Man PS4, like catching the pigeons, which were being used for crime. But others are specific to Miles Morales, like saving a cat. They were pretty fun to do, but they're not really the most outstanding side missions that you can ever put in a game, but still fun nonetheless. Morales. But enough about combat. One of the more surprising aspects of Spider-Man Miles Morales is how good the story was to me. Now usually this is where people would compare the story to how good it was in Spider-Man PS4 to Miles Morales, but I think a better comparison would be Spider-Verse, which I'll touch on that later. Now the story of this game picks up after Peter's journey in Spider-Man PS4 and Miles gets bitten by the spider. He's been getting trained by Peter for the past couple months and he's ready to be on his own. Peter Parker and Mary Jane leaves the city and it's up to Miles to protect New York while Peter is gone. And you see throughout this game that Miles second guesses himself at every step and turn. He also makes a lot of mistakes trying his best to live up to Spider-Man, Peter Parker. Now as with any great Spider-Man story, there is a balance between the personal life of Spider-Man and the hero side, and of course the side that everyone sees, Miles Morales. And the game does this wonderfully with introducing two groups, Roxanne and the Tinkerer and her group. Now without going into any spoilers here, both are weaved into Miles Morales' life in a way that feels natural, and the more you progress through the story, the more you start to understand and sympathize with the villain. But unfortunately, Miles Morales does still have that twirling villain in the game, which is a bit of a waste here, to be honest. Now another plus in the story department is how well the side missions flesh out the characters as well as the main missions. If you pay attention to the story, there is a huge payoff towards the end, which reminds me of the scene from Spider-Man 2, which puts a huge grin on my face. Again, without going into any spoilers, it ends up setting it up so well and is earned just like Spider-Man 2 with that scene. And when this scene happens, you can't help but smile because through the whole game, Spider-Man is trying to be the best Spider-Man, and not only that, but have the city accept him. And at the same time, he's trying to find out his own way of being Spider-Man. And when he finally dons that suit, I'm glad to say that they didn't just give him the perfect Spider-Man architect. He still had doubts, fears, and more, which is a change from how they treated Miles Morales in the Spider-Verse movie, which is one thing I think they did better in this game than Into the Spider-Verse. Which, don't get me wrong, is still fantastic, but I feel like they did better here. And you also have to remember that this is a video game and they have more time to spend on characters. Now the game is about 10 to 15 hours depending on how much side content you get through while going through the story, and it's fairly short, but it's a high quality experience. Which I really appreciate that Insomniac did this, because they could have easily stuffed this with side content and make the story not so great. But I'm glad to say that Miles Morales did not do this. Now with this being on the PS5, you're gonna get better visuals. Now I played on performance mode for the extra frame rates, and I never really noticed any dips at all through my whole playtime. And as someone who has a base PS4 for the whole last gen, because we're actually in next gen, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, the extra power is a blessing. The ray tracing used is noticeable if you look for it, and I'm sure if I owned a 4K TV, I would have noticed it a lot more, but as I don't have a 4K TV, because honestly I don't have a lot of money, I chose performance mode because I love the extra frames. And I loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it. The city looks extremely detailed as well and feels a lot different than Spider-Man PS4, which was placed in the spring or summer, I'm guessing, and this is placed in the winter. And as someone who lives in New York and lives near downtown Buffalo, it really reminded me of downtown Buffalo. Now I know that this is New York City, but it really did remind me of what it would be like if I was walking down in downtown Buffalo, especially in the winter, because I have done that when I was in college. Now with every game there comes bugs and glitches, which are bound to happen, and Spider-Man Miles Morales is no different, but I'm glad to say that these are few and far in between. A small annoyance to an otherwise fantastic experience. But just in case you want to know the ones that I personally ran into, there was one where an NPC was getting caught inside a door on top of a roof, which only happened once, and also there was another time where an attack animation glitched out and you appeared in one spot and then appeared in another, which also happened once, and aside from those, there really wasn't any other problems that I run into. Overall, Spider-Man Miles Morales builds on what came before and adds a unique touch to his own way of Spider-Man and is a perfect fit for Spider-Man Miles Morales. Is this more than DLC? Is this another infamous Dying Light? And I'm happy to say yes, it is. It definitely is. It's definitely worth playing if you enjoyed Spider-Man PS4. If you didn't enjoy Spider-Man PS4, you probably won't enjoy this game because this is basically the same mechanics, just a little added flavor into it. And of course a new story, new character, and all that kind of good stuff. I'm giving Spider-Man Miles Morales a 9 out of 10, and I definitely think you should be picking this up. It's definitely worth the price in my opinion. So what do you think about Spider-Man Miles Morales? Did you enjoy it or did you not enjoy it? Tell me your thoughts in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed this review for Spider-Man Miles Morales, make sure you subscribe for more video game reviews just like this. I have a lot planned, about 7 more planned in the next coming days. Thanks for watching guys, and remember, stay safe, stay charged, and have a good one.